They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Run, Barbara. Run as fast as you can. Do not stop until you cannot hear this terrible podcast, or else you may have the book and film Phantoms spoiled for you. Also run away from the mature content in this episode. Also zombies. You should probably run away from the zombies. Good luck, Barb.
To episode 9 of The Horror of Babylon, where we are discussing the 1998 film adaptation of the novel Phantoms. I'm Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
And this is our first episode in our new format. Yes, you did hear us in your ears last week. We are back again. Previously, we were doing an episode every 2 weeks. Now we are going to be semi-weekly, which basically means we're doing a book episode every 2 weeks. And then on the alternating weeks, we will be doing adaptation episodes sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. If they exist and if they are worthy of reviewing.
Yes, we will have some weeks off, but we do have schedules posted to our socials, and we will go over our upcoming stuff at the end of the episode. Regardless, let's go ahead and get into it. This is only our second episode, not covering The Stand now. It still feels weird.
Starting to feel like we were a Stand exclusive podcast for a minute.
Welcome to the Stand cast. I'm broadcasting from Boulder, Colorado.
We probably could have made that a thing if we really tried.
I mean, there's a Lord of the Rings podcast that goes through like every chapter.
Huh.
They do an episode on every chapter. When they finished Return of the King, they started on The Hobbit. They're almost done with The Hobbit, and they're going to do the Silmarillion after that.
If you're wondering why we're talking about The Stand so much, it's because this movie wasn't very good.
So, I mean, we could have done like an episode like per chapter, gone through the books, did the mini-series, like an episode per episode.
Yeah.
And then the comics and
at least a year's worth of content.
Yeah. I don't know.
I wouldn't have wanted to do that. But...
All right, so let's try to talk about this movie for at least part of this episode.
Yes, sir.
So we'll start with structure and format like we normally do. This movie was, I would say, a very condensed version of the novel.
They condensed a bunch of character roles. They cut a lot of characters. Not that many of them amounted to much in the book.
One of the kindest things I could say about this movie is that they were very economical about what they kept and what they got rid of from the book.
I agree. I think you should have done something along the lines of what they tried to do in this movie, but still make it about a half hour longer, but I'll get into that later.
Yeah, it's 96 minutes, which...
It was like... It honestly felt like by the time we finished it, it was technically a movie.
Yeah.
Like, it just made the runtime for theaters.
On one hand, by the time it was over, I was like, oh my god, thank god that's over. I don't want any more. But also, it probably could have been better by adding more time.
It could have benefited from certain things that we'll get into later.
Right.
If you would have told me that this was a miniseries, like an early 1990 miniseries, I would have believed you. That's what it was shot like, and that's what it felt like watching it.
Yeah.
It just wasn't as endearing as some of the other ones that we have seen.
No. So let's talk about our characters. And I'm actually going to pull up the IMDb page real quick because they actually changed a couple names. Alright, so we're talking about our protagonist. From the novel, she was Dr. Jennifer Page. And in the movie, for some reason, they changed her last name to Paley, which...
Seems like a weird, just like an arbitrary change.
Yeah, and they do that
There was a lot of arbitrary changes to this movie alone. Some of them I thought were really strange.
So I'm going to go ahead right off the bat with Jennifer. If you listen to our book episode, my main issue with her is that she kind of started off really strong, where she's a doctor she's the first person on the scene. She's investigating with her sister. She's figuring out what this thing is. And this thing is essentially an animal. This is essentially an issue of biology. As a medical doctor, she has a strong background in biology. And they were, in the book, Koontz was really setting it up so that she could be the one that figures out how to kill the monster.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just add this, like, throwaway character, Sarah Yamaguchi, and she figures it out instead of our protagonist. And it's like, what the hell? And Yamaguchi is in the movie. She dies pretty quickly.
Just like right off I don't even know why they included her, other than that she was technically in the book.
Yes, and it's like, I was like, ooh, so maybe they're going to have it so Jennifer figures it out and actually fix something that was wrong with the book. Nope.
I think if you were going to rewrite this script, instead of having her be a doctor, you have her be a researcher in a small town or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that's how you fix the issue of she doesn't have the technical expertise to know this. But in this movie, they had an anthropologist figure it out. And I'm like,
Which doesn't make sense at all.
That makes less sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 2 senses removed.
It would make more sense for the MD to figure it out.
Yeah.
Than from the archaeologist / anthropologist character.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that aside, she was played by Joanna Going, who I didn't recognize from anything else. But how did you think she was?
Very wooden. What's that saying? Deer in the headlights?
Deer in the headlights look?
She had deer in the headlights look whenever, like, she was the focal point. I don't know if this was her first. This might have been, like, one of her first big roles. And I understand not every actor hits it right out of the gate when they get something. I don't know, but that's the impression I was getting. It was very, I'm reading my lines. This is what I'm supposed to be saying.
Yeah, I'm running down her IMDb page, and she's been active since the mid-'80s, but it looks like it's a lot of TV.
Yeah.
I don't want to say she was bad, but she definitely wasn't a strong performance.
Made for TV style acting.
Definitely put me in, like, the Langoliers miniseries kind of vibe. Okay, so moving on to Lisa, who was played by Rose McGowan. Big change. Right off the bat, you find out in the car on the way to Snowfield that the mom isn't dead. The mom's drunk. And Jennifer is taking her sister to try and get her away from the mom.
And a boyfriend.
Yeah. Instead of, her sister becoming her ward because the mother died. Which on the surface, you're like, I guess they just made that change so there's less explanation. But
at the same time, she was still, like, afraid of the bodies.
It makes that first scene when they find the housekeeper dead in the kitchen a lot less powerful, because in the book she found her mother dead in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Which just made that a lot scarier.
And at first I was like, well, maybe they're making that change because, like, it's hard to convey that sort of, like, internal thoughts and exposition in a film. But then they go ahead and have an exposition scene. The sister's talking to the sheriff about her mom being a... You could have had that exposition scene just as easily be, she found my mother dead, and it's really affected her, and that's why she's... How old was this woman when this movie was made? Because I feel like she looked like she was in her mid-20s.
She was born 1973, so she would have been 25.
Okay, they needed a teenager to play this role. Like, I understand there wasn't as many teenage actors in the early 90s that were getting prominent roles.
They also just generally don't hire not adults. Like, if it's a teenage role, they'll generally hire somebody in their 20s.
Or get someone that looks young is what I'm saying, because she looked like she was...
Right. No, I agree.
She looked like she was graduated from college, going on a road trip with her sister that's 2 years older than her instead of, like, a decade.
She was also written like a more typical bratty teenager.
Yeah, in the book she's very... I don't know if she's more mature, reserved.
She is the one who has that line. She's the one who tells all the adults that everybody else is dead. And they take that away from her character in the movie.
Yeah.
Which isn't a big thing, but it's a cool part from the book.
Yeah, I don't know if it... like, that's not a change that would upset me, but I still would have preferred they kept it.
The actor Rose McGowan, she did fine.
Yeah.
She made more of an impression on me than the lady who played Jennifer did.
I would have probably cast her as Jennifer. I think she's a better actress.
Yeah, she definitely was. So moving on to Sheriff Bryce Hammond, who of course is played by Ben Affleck. I almost said
Batman.
Bat Affleck. I like Ben Affleck. I don't think this is his best movie.
I think this might be his worst. He is not the bomb in Phantoms. This is not Phantoms like a motherfucker. Kevin Smith is a liar, and I hate him even more now. I hate Kevin Smith more than I came into this podcast hating him.
I don't know if was that supposed to be sarcastic, like the whole Ben Affleck is a bomb in Phantoms thing?
I don't know. He's like really good friends with Ben Affleck.
Yeah,
though.
I mean Ben Affleck is in Dogma, right?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's like hyping it up or if it's like supposed to be ironic. These days, Kevin Smith can't stand to be made fun of. Back then, he could make fun of himself.
Yeah.
And so that could have been the case.
Okay, so I have some questions.
Yeah.
So they changed his background story too. In the book, his wife died and his son was in a coma. In this, he was a Harvard student who went on to be an FBI agent who killed a child during an FBI raid. The child was hiding in a closet, had a toy gun. He opened the closet and shot the kid. So he was kicked out of the FBI and then became a sheriff. But sheriffs are an elected position.
Yeah.
What kind of small town would elect somebody who was thrown out of the FBI for killing a kid?
I agree. I thought that was a dumb change, just from like a logical perspective. In the book, they go into greater detail, stuff that you can't really do in 90 minutes, which is probably another reason the movie should have been a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Like, he incorporated the city police because he was just doing such a good job.
Yeah.
He was a good cop who ran into some bad luck with his family and stuff.
Well, if you wanted to adapt the character from the book, Ben Affleck was too young to do that. One, he looked too young to be a sheriff. He looked too young to have had like a family, so I understand them wanting to make the change. The change they made just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Though I agree from like an emotional standpoint, if you ignore everything else, a FBI agent who's been kicked off the force for accidentally killing a kid in a raid could be a subject for an interesting movie.
Yeah, I mean, but that feels like would be like a whole separate thing.
Yeah. I mean, that could be a movie
by
unto itself. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the like side stories for the characters in the book probably could have been, but when you make a change like that, it sticks out, especially when you are just coming off of finishing the book again.
Right. And then I do think Ben Affleck is a good actor, but
I think he's I'm gonna go ahead and spoil this. I want the movie remade. I want them to give Phantoms another shot because I think it's a story that you could make into a good horror movie.
Yeah.
And I want Ben Affleck recast in the role. I think he could pull off that grizzled sheriff role now.
I agree.
But like, think of him in like The Town or The Accountant. I don't know if you've seen that, or even his when he plays Bruce Wayne, not like specifically in the Batman suit. He kind of pulls off that kind of attitude of, I'm a little grizzled, but I'm really way smarter than you're giving me credit for.
Right, and that was Bryce Hammond's whole thing in the book, is that he pretended to be stupider than he was so that he could get people to underestimate him. And that's portrayed in the book in his introduction during the interrogation. The changes they made were awkward, and as I said, it wasn't Ben Affleck's strongest performance.
And we are coming right off of finishing You for the first time, and I re-listened to it. So.
Yeah, it's the first time I've read the book, and we just finished watching the movie. We watched the movie, took a bathroom break, fired up the microphones, so that's how that is. So moving on to the deputies, they got rid of all of the deputies from the book, except for Stu Wargle, which I think is fine. A lot of the other deputies were fine characters, but the way they were adapting it, this works. And Stu, being the bad one, is obviously the one you keep. So this was the first performance maybe the only performance that like really impressed me in this movie, Liev Schreiber as Deputy Stu Wargle. You mentioned when we were watching it, not how you pictured him in your head while you were reading, but I thought he was the highlight of this movie.
Oh no, the actor did an amazing job with such a small role, especially they expanded it from the book.
Mm-hmm.
He was probably the best actor in this movie. Like, he gave the best actual performance.
Yes.
Which is weird, because Peter O'Toole's in this movie.
Right, and Peter O'Toole's the more impressive actor if you look at the whole career, but just in this movie.
In this movie, yeah.
His facial expressions, his line, "Hey, you want to see something?" is just kind of became the catchphrase of the movie.
Yeah.
Plus, they gave him that whole stinger at the end. He was such a creep. I mean...
He conveyed... This movie did not do a great job with conveying things through non-visual communication, except him.
Yeah.
He the way he smiled at the person who was supposed to be a teenager. I don't like to belittle actors, because I have tried to act and I am not good at it. I understand that giving a good performance is a art. It is very hard to do.
Yep.
But I honestly feel like he was the only person, except Peter O'Toole.
Yeah.
They were the only two who were taking their role seriously, or were trying to turn in a performance for the characters that they were supposed to be.
There was a lot of, I don't want to say people phoned it in, but it kind of felt like it.
There were either people phoned it in, or they were acting like it was a made-for-TV movie.
Yeah, like, I know that this is not a serious movie. I know that I'm not going to be in any kind of contention for an award. I'm not going to make so much money, so, I'm going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to go home. But you definitely tell with Liev Schreiber that he really developed a character for Stu Wargle, even, like you said, past what's in the book.
Yeah.
And really made that character, pop on the screen. And he was super fun to watch. I was definitely less invested after he died.
I liked his Jeffrey Dahmer glasses.
Yeah. He just had, like, little ways of making himself stick out from the other two cops. He was the only one not wearing a cowboy hat. He was constantly chewing gum that just made him more noticeable from the other two. He
took off his glove to touch a dead body.
Oh, my God. I thought he was going to, like, shove his hand up the dead woman's nightie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
I honestly thought that's exactly where that was going. I was like, how graphic is this going to be?
His death scene was pretty cool. Effects with the moth were not as bad as I thought they were going to be.
They weren't as bad as I thought they were going to be. I still think that this movie could have benefited from a higher budget.
Yes. I mean, what movie couldn't?
I think the plot of Phantoms necessitates a higher budget.
I thought the dog and the moth looked a lot better than the blob at the end.
The blob at the end was definitely the worst part.
And so let's actually just talk about the ancient enemy itself. Now, what did you think about how it was portrayed in this movie?
It was fine. My biggest problem with the ancient enemy, it again comes down to movie length. They got to figuring out what the thing was entirely too quick.
Yeah.
The best part about the ancient enemy, and especially in the book, is there's all this mystery around it. It's calling people, it's messing with them, it's getting them to go to churches and hotels, and then just leaving body parts around, and you're like, well, what is this thing? Like, you don't know it's an amorphous blob that absorbs the personalities of and memories of everything it eats and can shapeshift. For half of the book, you could believe it was ghosts or aliens or literally anything.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, they're talking about plagues, they're talking about psychopaths, they're talking about army experiments.
It portrayed itself through the bodies, the deceased in this movie, a lot more than it did in the book. That's primarily for budget issues because that is cheaper to do.
They also just had to have a way for it to be visually represented on the screen.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff from the book would have been just hard to do with, I'm sure, the budget they had. Like, for instance, when the soldiers go down into the sewer, and there's just like droves of animals just going through the sewer.
I think that how they handled that scene is exactly how I would have told them to handle it.
Yeah.
If you had budgetary constraints, I'm like, you keep it off screen, you don't show what the soldier sees, you have him dragged away into the darkness. I would have told them to cut the music out of that scene, because it was all that, like, really loud, let's give the stinger music.
Yeah.
And I think a scene like that, you need to let your imagination do the work, and it helps if you just let it play out. And again, I know it's, like, technically invincible, but when I'm seeing everything in, like, a humanoid form, I'm less afraid of it. I'm like, oh, they're just dudes.
Before we get too much into what was scary and what was not scary, we do need to talk a little bit about Professor Timothy Flight, played by the legendary Peter O'Toole, who
Did a good job.
Yeah, he did good. He wasn't as striking as Liev Schreiber was, but he did a good job playing the flighty, no pun intended, professor. You know, the
Yeah, no, I mean, he acted like the character from the book.
Yeah.
At least as much as they had his, like, side story in there.
Right. And, I mean, was it disappointing to not see him at a breakfast where he totally rips off his publisher ordering like $200 worth of food? Sure.
How you condense his story, you just have the science team pick him up when they hear the name. I was like, oh, that's the correct decision as soon as I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes more sense.
That's how you merge that story.
Instead of in the book where somebody leaks the information to the press and then the publisher finds out about it from the press and then goes to him and buys him a flight to America, and it's just really contrived.
Do a press conference. It'll sell 1 million copies.
Did this movie scare you?
No.
No.
I think there were a couple scenes where they could have probably scared me if I was a very young child, but they were not the scenes that they thought they were.
There was one shot that I thought was genuinely creepy, and that was after they find the decapitated heads in the bakery. Jennifer and Lisa are trying to leave out the front of the bakery, and they walk into like the front parlor, and it's dark. The deputies are in there, but you don't know it yet, and you see one of the deputies move in the shadow. That
was good. One of the shots that I liked, and I talk to you about this all the time, I hate like stinger scares and loud jump scare music. They did that a lot in this movie, and a lot of times they didn't even need to. Like, it wasn't a jump scare, like the thing's just on screen and they start playing those like loud chimes or whatever they are choosing to use for the sting in that moment, where they're just out there and it's just the town making noise because the ancient enemy's fucking with everything. It's making lights flash, it's ringing the church bell, it's causing alarms to go off. I'm like, that's natural noise, and if you had more time to like build up the mystery, you'd be like, well, what's causing all of this? Especially if you haven't read the book, what's causing all of this? How is this working?
Right.
That could have been scary if you built it up right.
So, what was scary about the book was the atmosphere of the town.
Yeah.
And the slow build up to that.
Slow build and slow burn horror movies don't have quite the audience pool. The ones that have the audience pool are like the Conjuring movies, and they have a lot of the jump scares, even though they also have some good but it's possible to make, is what I'm saying. Honestly, when I'm sitting there watching this, someone I thought could pull off this slow burn is Mike Flanagan. You know him from Dr. Sleep. I know him from Haunting on Hill House and Midnight Mass. He takes like 8 episodes to tell a very long, slow burn story where most of the horror doesn't. It gives you a taste of it at the beginning, and then like just bombards you with it at the end. He knows how. If I was gonna pick a director for Phantoms, because I know you need that slow burn, you need that atmosphere, you need that character building. Not that these are strong characters, but you got to try to pull people into the story.
Right.
Mike Flanagan's the guy I would have chose to. He's my pick for the directing the remake.
He's a total King fanboy. You'd slam the script down on his desk and he'd pick it up and throw it in the wastebasket. And he's like, I'm not doing Koontz.
I would just cross out Koontz's name and write King.
Oh, I haven't read this one.
Yeah. Just trick them. There's hidden gems, and they're so bad it's good. this was just bad. Like, it wasn't so bad that it was, like, fun to point and laugh at, which is the impression that Kevin Smith fucking gave me.
Yeah.
Or I either thought it was that, or it was, like, a hidden gem, because those are the two things that he talks about.
Yeah.
This was just not enjoyable.
No, I mean, if you've read the book and you like the book, I would say go ahead and watch it just so you have the experience. I enjoyed seeing Liev Schreiber and Peter O'Toole in their performances. There were a couple practical effects that were okay. Probably will not watch it again.
I wouldn't even recommend it. I'd say that if you want a Phantoms experience and you like the book, I'd tell you just to play Silent Hill. I'd say that's
or read the book again.
Or read the book again. I would tell you to watch John Carpenter's The Thing. It does the same kind of story better.
Or if you read the book, listen to the audiobook this time.
Or watch The Blob. Like, I literally recommend anything other than literally this movie.
I'm a little bit of a completionist, though. Like,
yeah.
Every time I read a book, I'm like, okay, now I've got to see all the movies based on it. We have better things to look forward to in our future. So let's go ahead and talk about what we have coming up on The Horror of Babylon. Okay, so this episode is hitting your ears on Sunday, February 13th. Next week, as we announced on our last episode, we are going to be doing an episode on the novella The Scarlet Plague by Jack London.
Reading it this weekend.
Super short. I think if you're doing the audiobook, it's like maybe 2 hours. So you've got plenty of time to read that if you haven't started it. There's no adaptations of that, so we are going to be off on the week of February 27th. We're going to be back first Sunday in March 6th, with Stephen King's The Mist, another great novella. One of my favorite Stephen King books.
That might be my favorite. It's not a short story. It's a novella, right?
Yeah, it's a novella.
That's my favorite one of his.
It's favorite novella. It's really hard to choose between that, The Body, which is what Stand By Me is based off of, and Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. Those are all really good novellas. And Apt Pupil is also really good. I don't know. Mist is definitely up there. Then in the next week, March the 13th, we are going to be doing the Mist film adaptation. On March the 20th, we are going to do the short story Mark of the Beast by Rudyard Kipling. And we are going to be off on the week of the 27th. We're going to be back April 3rd with Gotham by Gaslight. That is the Batman comic where he fights Jack the Ripper. And then on the 10th, April 10th, we are going to be back with the film version of that. Then we have a couple other things before we get to It in May, but that's as far as we're going to go right now. So a lot of shorter things before we get to It. Novellas, short stories, comics.
Because that will be another one of those trials.
Yeah, we're going to do a lot of episodes on It. The book itself is broken up into 5 books. Like The Stand is broken up into 3. It's broken up into 5. We'll do an episode on each of those. And then there's the 90s miniseries plus each of the 2 film adaptations. So we're going to be doing at least 8 episodes on It. But I don't think that's going to feel like as much of a chore as it was with The Stand.
No, especially because I've already read it. I'm probably going to listen to that one on audiobook.
I've read it twice, so this will be my 3rd time.
And I'm pretty familiar with the story. I'm going to reread it because I want to know specifically what parts are happening when.
I think I enjoyed my second read of it a lot more than my first read.
Yeah.
Because the first one, while good, was a little overwhelming because there's just so much being thrown at you. And the second time, when you already know what's going to happen, and you can really think a lot more about the structure and the characters and the development. So let me wrap up the show by telling you about the book I'm reading right now.
Okay.
It's called Dracul.
Dracul.
It is about Bram Stoker.
Okay.
But it is a novel, and it takes place with... it's about him and his sister growing up in Ireland, and their nanny is a vampire.
I want to read this. That sounds amazing.
Hold on. It's written by Darcy Stoker, his great-grandnephew.
I have a bunch of his books. Like, he wrote an official sequel to Dracula. I've been meaning to read it for years, but I just keep reading things that are reviewed way better.
Well, I haven't read that one, but this book is awesome so far.
That one I'll read.
Yeah. Eventually we're going to cover Dracula, and I thought it might be cool to make a project of that as well, like do Dracula, and do Powers of Darkness, which is that alternate version I told you about. Then we could do this, maybe we could do the sequel, maybe cover like...
I think Dracula is going to be one of our big projects just because of how influential it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like...
It's the same thing with The Stand, like, we did, 8 episodes on that?
Right,
7?
Dracula's better.
Yeah, Dracula is... I would call it a quintessential horror novel, and I don't think many would argue with me.
There's no way we could cover every film adaptation, but we could hit, like, the highlights of Nosferatu and the Bela Lugosi one, maybe the Christopher Lee one.
It's like, whenever we get around to Frankenstein, it's one of those ones that I feel we owe it to make a project of, not only because it's good, but because there's all these adaptations and all these changes over the years and public perception. I
have read the book, but I've never seen, like, the original Frankenstein movie. I've been meaning to. And I've also wanted to see, like, the newer one that, like, I think it's called Victor Frankenstein. It's got James McAvoy and Daniel Radcliffe in it. I've wanted to see that, but haven't. I have read the book, though. I can say at least that much. But yeah, Dracula is very good, and that might be something we cover eventually. I'm really, really super enjoying it. So
I'm gonna move that one up my reading list because that actually sounds genuinely enjoyable.
But thank you very much for joining us. Remember, next time we are covering Jack London's The Scarlet Plague, so start up on that. Thank you for watching this terrible movie with me tonight, Daniel.
You are very welcome, Ryan.
All right, thank you, everybody. Stay scary.
Stay scary.
Well, that was horrendous. I would tell you boys good job, but the dryness of my sarcasm would likely evaporate all the moisture in both your bodies. Anyway, if you want to hear more of this, please subscribe to their YouTube channel by searching for The Horror of Babylon. You can follow them on Twitter at HorrorPod69. The Facebook page is under The Horror of Babylon. And on Instagram, these fools are The Horror of Babylon, one word. Reach their assuredly empty inbox at thehorrorofbabylonpodcast@gmail.com. You can also request their Discord server link via any other channel. And finally, if you are foolish enough to support this abomination financially, search for The Horror of Babylon on patreon.com. And God save your soul if you do.